Are you ready?
Okay.
Okay. Coffee and maybe some apple pie and I'm going to let our guest introduce herself. Our first guest in this session, first ever, is Kris Kondo. Okay, so and here she is, Kris.
Hi.
Yeah.
Nice to be in New Jersey again.
Yeah, here we are in this New Jersey diner. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to introduce myself in a sideways fashion because I'm in New Jersey because my brother and sister live here. They've been New Jersey residents for a long time, and it's nice to visit New Jersey. Okay. Well, hi, Scott.
Hi.
You just told me your name.
Yes. Nice to meet
you.
you.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What are you doing here?
In New Jersey?
Yeah.
I'm from New Jersey.
You're from New Jersey, but do you live in New Jersey now?
Well, I was born in Philadelphia, and I grew up across the Delaware River in a small town in South Jersey called Riverton, Palmyra, and then Riverton. They're two towns that are right next to each other. No, I'm in Japan. Yeah.
You live in Japan? Oh, I live in Japan too.
You do?
Yeah.
Wow.
And my brother and sister.
Well, where do you live in Japan?
I live in a village called Kyokawa Village. It's in the Tanzawa Mountains west of Tokyo.
And what prefecture would that be?
Kanagawa.
Kanagawa.
I'm in the country of Kanagawa. We're the only official village left in Kanagawa.
Really?
Yeah.
It's amazing. My son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren live in Kanagawa. In Kawasaki. Cool. Yeah. And I just saw them well, Christmas. They were here for Christmas. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And how long have you been living there?
I came to Japan in 1972.
1972. So that's
50 years.
50 years in Japan.
Yes.
That's got to be like Lafcadio Hearn or something like that.
Yeah. Well, actually, I came by ship.
By ship?
Yeah, I was living in Boston. I had a Japanese partner at the time. We were not married. Okay. But I met many people from Japan, and I had always been interested in Japan anyway. So I saved up my money to come for a year. Okay. And when I went to the travel agent, it was before the jumbos were flying. So they said, well, it costs the same to go by ship as to go by plane. Really? Would you like to go by ship?
Well, yeah, I've always wanted to travel by ship, but I never.
Yeah, it was actually the Brazil Maru. It was the second to last trip, immigrant ship from, and I took a trip. Okay, so you want to know where I'm from, I guess. So this is a story that's always difficult because people just don't get it. But I was born in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is where my dad grew up. My mother was just visiting my grandmother at the time, my father's mother, when I was born. So I never actually lived there.
You never actually lived in Wisconsin?
No, I never actually lived in Wisconsin. I spent a great deal.
You were born there, but you never.
But I never lived there. Yeah, okay. But I spent a great deal of time there because we always had Christmases together, and my parents shipped me off there a couple summers, and my cousins would come stay with us. We had a big family.
So where was your official?
My parents were living. My dad was still in the Air Force when I was born, and they were in Long Beach, California.
Okay, and this is the U.S. Air Force, right?
Yeah, U.S. Air Force. So my mom and dad, my dad is from Wisconsin. My mother is from Michigan, very Midwestern. They met during the war. And actually my father's oldest brother married them. He was a minister, and he had been a chaplain overseas. My dad never actually fought. He was a flight instructor in Texas. Okay. during the war. But he,
Well, I asked it because on, I've just checked your Facebook page and it says Canada.
okay, Canada. Okay, so what happened? Okay, my family moved a lot. Okay, so
Okay.
they lived in California when I was a baby that I don't remember at all. Here's some funny stories about that. But then we ended up in Michigan. My dad worked for Kaiser Fraser, and they had us in one of those bungalows in Ypsilanti, near the Kaiser Fraser plant. When I was in, okay, when we moved.
Kaiser, that is like Kaiser aluminum? Kaiser?
No, Kaiser cars, and they
Cars.
made airplanes.
Ah,
They made
okay.
airplanes during the Second World War,
Right.
and they were a car company at the time. He was what do you call it? Tool and die.
Okay.
Okay, and later production. So then we moved to Wayne, Michigan, in the middle of my kindergarten. Then we moved to Pennsylvania. My dad got a job at a steel mill in Pennsylvania.
Where in Pennsylvania is that? Like
I don't know.
Pittsburgh?
Honestly, it was in the mountains.
Well, I think Pittsburgh is famous for steel factory.
Yeah.
So,
We
is it in
actually
Western
we lived
Pennsylvania?
in the mountains, and I went to one of those 2-room schoolhouses with the desks, for a half a year.
Okay.
And then my father was offered a job from a good friend of his in Canada.
Wow.
And so we moved to Toronto when I was in the middle of first grade. My father was the production engineer for the Avro Aero, which was a supersonic fighter jet, which the Canadian government was building.
I've never heard of that, but
Never heard of that. Well, there's a movie made about it. You can look it up later. But unfortunately, the Canadian government changed from liberal to conservative, and Eisenhower, the Americans didn't want the Canadians to have something in advance of what they had. So the whole project was dumped.
Okay.
So that was so we moved in the early 50s to Canada. I've been an immigrant almost all my life. An immigrant almost all my life.
Well,
immigrant both.
How about that? I mean, how did you feel about moving so much all the time? Did you,
well, when you're a kid,
you
don't know any different. You just do what your family does, right?
Did you have problems adjusting to the different places you moved to?
For me, I think I had the least difficulty of my siblings.
Right.
I changed schools the least, and I adjusted the best, probably because I sort of lived inside my head a lot.
That's yeah. But which place where you lived while you were in Canada or United States before you coming to Japan? Which did you like?
So in Canada, we lived in a place called Humber Valley, which was a suburb in Etobicoke of Toronto. Now it's center city, but because Toronto has expanded so much. But it was the edge of we always lived at the very edge of the suburbs of any place we lived.
And which of these places did you like best?
Well, we moved to when I was in the mid, almost finished 5th grade. After they dumped the Avro Aero project, my father was transferred, got a job in Montreal. Utilizing steel mill, and we lived at the end of the island in Centerville, and that was my favorite place in Canada. And it was my formative years. I was in Quebec. The English schools are so-called private, although they're it's just, the school system in Canada is a lot like Japan. They have like a Mombusho, and the education, English education all over Canada is pretty much prescribed by the central government rather than.
Did you have to learn to speak French when living?
Yeah, well, I had to learn to speak French.
Okay.
But but everybody did. But it was kind of like English in Japan. The people who didn't, and the people who did.
Well, do you still speak French?
Yeah, I can understand French, and I don't speak it very well, but I can understand it and read it fairly well.
Okay.
And I was also in the age where if you were streamed to go to college, which was decided by your teachers, I learned Latin.
Latin. Ah,
I
yeah.
had 4 years of Latin.
That was kind of like a required course, even, well, just before I went to high school, which, I
Yeah,
graduated.
yeah. It was just after I graduated that it changed. Yeah.
Yeah. I still took Latin, but it wasn't required for college prep, but
It was
still,
the most useful subject I studied, actually.
yeah,
It was
well,
hard. We did the translation of all the classics and everything, and later
the
I went on to study art and,
the
write poetry and
Schalick
things like
board,
that.
yeah.
So I would know, when they showed us slides in art school of Perseus and the head of Medusa and all that kind of stuff,
And
I knew all the stories because we had to translate them.
all right, good, yeah. So, and the orations against Lucius Catiline, all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Yes, all that kind of stuff.
yeah. Oh, not Scotchy.
That's because she's
By
very
the
nuts.
way, I take it you've lived here over 50 years. You speak Japanese and
I speak fairly well, reading and well, yeah, probably third or fourth grade kanji,
okay.
but I was very into poetry. So and my husband, that's how we met, because of poetry, and we did a lot of translation together. And he was especially into haiku and haikai no renga or renku.
Yeah. So
And we
how would you say that in English for people who don't
well,
understand?
renku, it's a linked poetry based.
Linked verse.
Yeah.
Okay, so linked haiku, is that right? Linked haiku
Well,
verse?
not really. The haiku actually came from renku. Matsuo Basho
Right,
was
yeah.
actually he was a
Hoku,
linked verse poet. He
yeah.
did haikai no renga,
Renga,
which was called later was called renku.
renku.
But the first verse
The first,
is how haiku developed
yeah.
in Japan.
That
So
was
it's called the
called
hoku.
hoku, right? And then
Yeah,
Basho
yeah.
was the
Basho was the one who
started
popularized
it
it.
and said that this can exist as an independent verse form, right? So, and
Yeah,
then
well,
what
no,
you
actually,
mentioned before,
Shiki was the one who took it out.
the what?
Shiki,
Ah,
later, many. So
oh, yeah,
Basho went around everywhere doing linked verse with all these people, and
right.
later both haiku and senryu come from the linked verse. But my husband was passionate about that, and between he and I, we started the Association of International Renku, and
Oh,
we
really?
started spreading it we started writing together with people in English just shortly after we married. I had sort of artistic group of people who liked to write poetry too, and we would he would
So,
lead in
yeah,
writing this linked verse. But later in the 90s, we started a group called the Association of International Renku.
okay. Well,
And he was studying with all different Renku groups in Japan, and so was I in the 90s.
so
He would
the family name you use now, Kris Kondo is a
Kondo,
Japanese name, is it?
yeah, and
Okay.
he's very well known in the haiku Renku world too, Tadashi Kondo.
Okay. Right.
And we were together over 20 years, but some things were great and some things weren't.
Yeah, well, marriage.
The poetry was great. The poetry was absolutely great. So,
Yeah,
and I learned a lot.
and he's around the same age you are.
He's 3 years younger, and he's still involved internationally, I believe.
And how did you meet to begin with? If you
We
want.
met I taught in an English school in Shinjuku shortly after I came, Linguaphone language school. And I came about the time when they were having the, what do you call those? The protest against the Vietnam War.
Oh,
And the universities were shut.
Hansen Undo,
Yeah, Hantai Undo, yeah.
But before that, there was the Ampo Treaty, the protest against the treaty. Are you
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about the period of
many
student
of the
unrest?
universities were actually closed for a couple of years.
Right. Yeah,
And I was teaching at so we had a special course for people who wanted to intensive 6-month course, every day geared towards university students who wanted to study English intensively. And one of my students
where they
in
were
that
battling
class
with riot police
became a friend. And
the question is, that you were here during the time that the university students were battling the riot police in Kondo?
Yes, yes, yes.
We hear that. Well, and did you actually see any of that?
No,
No? Well,
I
and
didn't.
you were teaching in Shinjuku?
In Shinjuku, in Western Shinjuku, west part of Shinjuku, yeah.
All right. Okay.
At a, it's called Lingophone Language Center.
Okay. And how did you get to Japan to begin with?
Okay, how did I get to Japan? Okay, as
I
I
know
said,
you came by boat. That's not what I'm asking, but why? Why you came?
okay, we have to back up a little bit. Okay, so anyway, after my family, moved to Montreal, and I graduated from high school there. But my passion since I was little has always been art.
Okay.
So I wanted to go to art school.
Okay.
When I was there were a number of things that sort of led to that, but one of them was well, actually going back to Kenosha, my father had a beautiful watercolor painted by a friend of his of a little river outside of Kenosha that was just gorgeous, that always hung in a place of honor in our living room.
Okay.
And I think, he had other prints and things of famous artists and things like that, but I think that sort of influenced me to a certain extent. My mother, when we were living in Toronto, had her portrait and the children's portraits painted in oils by a lady who came to our house. And she invited my mother and I to her studio, and that's when I just went, this is what I want to do. She just had, all these sketches and everything. She lived upstairs of a family in an older house, and she had all these sketches of the Lake Ontario and sketches of portraits of people and sketches of the little boy downstairs crying. And
so is it
it
safe
was such
to
a beautiful
say
mess that I fell in love with it.
is it safe to say that your interest in art led to your interest in coming to Japan?
Yes, and and poetry.
And poetry. Where did you first encounter Japanese poetry?
Probably in high school. We weren't taught haiku in high school, but I was an avid reader, and I was interested in poetry. I had a wonderful English teacher in high school. He was actually Jewish, and he commuted from downtown Montreal to our high school, and I got to know him extremely well because my family had a bit of a crisis when I was in high school, and we had to move outside of the district just before my senior year. But all of my teachers wanted me to still go to school at my school. So one of the teachers who was commuting, my English teacher, picked me up every morning and dropped me off. Different teachers would pick me up and drop me off to my school. So my English teacher was the main teacher.
Yeah. What led to your family having to move outside the district? What was that about?
My parents were in a bad automobile accident when I was in high school, and my father had some brain damage as a result, and he had a complete. Well, I mean that the breakdown happened after we moved.
I see.
But he just could not keep up with the job that he had at the time because of the accident.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, my parents were in a very, not in high school, but in college at the time. They were in a very bad automobile accident too. My father lost an eye and broke the back and so forth. And anyway, that's another similarity.
Yeah, but that these things, they're things that change our lives and make us stronger in a sense. But it was, But the good thing was that this teacher actually commuted with his son who went to the elementary school. My high school was on the campus of McDonald College, which was the educational and agricultural college of McGill University.
Okay.
So it was a teaching, they practiced
teaching. What university?
McGill.
McGill, okay. All right.
So,
and that's
McDonald College was the agriculture and teaching department of McGill University.
Okay.
So
do you recall what the Japanese poetry that was it haiku poetry, or was it like
a number of different things? I think the first real haiku and tanka that I had a book of was actually one of my first boyfriends in when I was in art school in college. He gave me this beautiful book of haiku and tanka that had a lot of illustrations of the, the woodblock prints, but,
Were they
very well
translated to
translated.
English, I suppose, right?
And well translated into English, but traditional Japanese.
They had the original Japanese and the
No,
English.
no, this one only had the English.
Okay.
But then later I did get the R.H. Blythe's
Yeah.
translation.
So this initial book was an anthology, was it? And
It's a small, I should look for it.
it's
Just a small, it was a very small, maybe probably a Tuttle book,
a Tuttle book, okay.
but it was printed on very thin wood.
Uh-huh.
And it had but it was absolutely beautiful. It was interesting that sort of was a precursor to, but Boston, as you know, Okakudo Tenshin and the Book of Tea. Okakudo Tenshin was lived in Boston and was a friend of Isabella Stewart Gardner, who had the Gardner Museum, and a beautiful Japanese collection of, in the Boston Museum.
The Horikawa collection.
Yeah.
And so you were in university in Boston, and that was what, Tufts?
Okay, I was at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, which was a sister school of Tufts. So I got my degree from Tufts because we were connected.
All right, okay.
And I was at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts first, and then I spent a couple more years getting my teaching degree.
Okay, at that time, what you needed was a recommendation. Were there things such as SATs at that time? Scholastic?
Well, we had SATs, yeah. So I had, interesting thing about SATs, we had SATs in Canada, and the interesting thing about SATs was that me and my siblings, and we all went to different high schools. My older sister and I were at the same high school. We all scored in the top 10.
Okay.
Of the SATs in our school. And people thinking, oh, you did? Really? So, and we had this thing at the museum school. Even the dean of the school said, oh, artists aren't intellectual sort of things. But I had the grades to get into Tufts even without having the connection of the museum school.
Right. And so you were there, what was that?
So what happened, how I got to Japan was, when I was in the art school, they had a program called Fifth Year, which was people had a studio year and they applied for traveling scholarships. Okay, so I had my own studio, and I was also taking extra courses at Tufts to get my degree. But a visiting artist came to my school and had an exhibition there, and he was from Japan. And I saw his work and it just blew me away.
Do you remember his name?
Yeah, well, I became his lover.
This is the Kondo, or no?
Oh, yes.
This is the guy you eventually married?
No,
another guy.
No, this was before I came to Japan.
Oh, we get into the romances of Kris Kondo.
Yeah. So it was a very funny thing. So anyway, I kept visiting his show and everything. I wasn't actually spending a lot of time at school because I was in my studio year. But I told the librarian, who also was in charge of the library, this is the direction I want to go in. This is the kind of stuff I want to do. And so that summer, maybe it was, that summer, my painting teacher came to me before they announced the traveling scholarships, and he said, I'm really very, very sorry. I voted against you for the traveling scholarship. Not because your work wasn't, up to par or, good for what we were going, for what we were looking for, but because you are the kind of person who's, going to travel and do all kinds of things, but your classmate so-and-so does not have the opportunity to do that. So I voted for him, but I have a consolation prize for you. So this was a teacher, he was from Belgium, and his wife was worked in the textile department of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, repairing tapestries and reupholstering furniture there. Well, my teacher had heard that my mother's hobby was reupholstering furniture, so he thought I knew something about it.
Okay.
So he gave me a summer job at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum,
Okay. All
and
right.
I was working with his wife. Well, that was also the year of many protests in the schools, in the universities in the States, and people were very sensitive to what students wanted, so they wouldn't protest.
Okay.
And I had been vice president of the student council, which was a nothing job,
Right. Right.
in art school, who cares? But
Right.
we did a survey of what the students wanted to change in the school
Right.
when I was in my 4th year.
Right.
And the school took it seriously, and all summer long they were having meetings
Mhm.
to what to change at the school.
Right.
So one day after work, my boss says, "Well, why, my teacher lived between the Isabella Stewart Gardner and the museum, and the museum school they lived next door to the museum school, actually. So she invited me over to tea, and my teacher, Jan Cox, comes in with Kajiaso from the meeting. Kajiaso had been invited to teach at school there. He was that guest artist whose work and it was just one of those things, when you meet somebody and you just know that your life has changed.
Okay. Yeah.
And it wasn't long after that he invited me over, and then we became a thing for 4 years. So I met many, many people from Japan. He had many guests, and yeah. But we were both idealistic artists. He was 10 years older than I was.
Right.
So, you're idealistic artists. He treated me really well. Our first date, he invited me to the mayor of Boston's ball.
Well, what do you mean by idealistic artist? I mean, for
Well,
our
we didn't
audience who
we
might
didn't
not,
think about we didn't think about marriage and that kind of stuff.
oh, you didn't think
We
about.
were a dedicated couple, and there
So
was no
just
problem about
meaning,
that.
what does it mean dedicated to art? Is that what?
To art, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and I got the idea, after meeting a number of people from Japan, his friends and things like that, yeah, I wanted to go to Japan for a year.
Okay.
So I saved up my money to come here.
I have some photos that you showed me, and
Mhm.
I'd like to share them and have you
Mhm.
comment on them. Right. So let's start. Oh, wait a minute here.
I've sort of put them in chronological order.
Okay. I don't know how this is. I probably think this is some from your Facebook page. Is that right?
Yeah, this is my Facebook page. So
Okay.
these are my kids. I have 3 wonderful kids.
Okay. Great. Great. It's a nice purple hat you have there. Do you wear that all the time, or is it?
I wear hats a lot, and I have many different hats. And this hat, there's what do you call it? A little badge on it
Yeah. Yeah.
that says smile. And the center of my Facebook page, I volunteered up in Ishinomaki after the earthquake.
Really? Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I painted all these little stone Jesus for the souls of the people who were lost.
Right. Right.
So that's what that's from. And then this badge that I have on my hat, the 1 year anniversary, they had a special, the volunteer group that I worked for was invited to a special ceremony, and the children in the school who survived that horrible, who did an act there, and the children from Kobe who had survived the Kobe
Right.
Earthquake sent these badges as encouragement
Okay. Great.
for that.
About the people in this photo, the one I guess would be on your physical right. You have your arm around.
That's my son.
No. This would.
On my physical right, that's my daughter Karen, and
Okay, and how old is she?
she's 29 now, and she lives with me. She's an
She lives with you
illustrator.
There in Kanagawa. Okay.
Mhm.
And who is the young the woman?
The laughing one is my daughter Anna, and she will be she's 39, and she now lives in Maui.
Maui. Oh, okay. And that's obviously your son?
No, I've been to Hawaii, but she just moved to Maui during the pandemic, actually.
Oh, okay.
from California, and she had moved to the US when she was 14. It's a long story.
Okay.
Um,
And the young man is your son?
my son, yeah, and he's 41, and he lives in Gunma, and I have two beautiful grandchildren.
Gunma, in Gunma. Okay.
Yeah.
And
And
how old is he? Oh, you
this
said
is-
he's 41. Okay. What is his name?
his name is George. Okay, George,
Yeah.
Anna, Karen. So all Japanese names to Georgie, Anna, Karen.
Okay. Yeah. And by the way, are you a naturalized Japanese citizen, or are you a US
No,
citizen
no,
or
no.
Canadian? Or what?
No. I'm very adverse to paperwork.
Well, are you
Make me
usually an
want to be a
American citizen
Japanese citizen.
or a Canadian citizen or what?
No, I'm a US citizen.
Right.
I was very lucky that I lived long enough in the US that I could pass my citizenship on to my kids. So my two older kids have no problem with that. My younger one, we just don't say anything.
Okay. And is this photo, is that from your American?
That's my very first passport photo from when I came to
So
Japan.
this is what,
1972.
1972. Wow. Okay, great.
So my maiden name was Young.
Young, right.
But my
you were young.
Yeah, we have a family joke about that. But my grandfather emigrated from Sweden, so he changed his name from Johansson to Young when he emigrated.
Oh, so your ancestors
Half
are
Swedish.
half Swedish, and what else? What's the other half?
On my mother's side, 1/4 German and 1/4 mixed back to the Mayflower. Actually,
Okay.
the captain of the second Mayflower was Chapin, and there's a statue of him in Plymouth.
Okay, so English, right?
Yeah, British.
Okay, good. And let's see here. What do we got here? And oh, sorry. Hold on a minute. Yeah. And what is
This is my mother and father.
okay? All right.
About the time they were married, so it would have been around 1940 something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And you, okay, so then let's see, what do we got here? Close that and all right.
unfortunately, my mother passed away October 1st, the year I came to Japan.
Uh-huh.
Cerebral hemorrhage. So
How old was she when she passed away?
49.
Oh, that's quite early.
Yeah, it was very surprising. Yeah. So this is the top one is my mother and I, and we because my family moved to Canada, we made many trips back to the States. We always had Christmas together, and there was a time when both my mother's and father's families were very large, and they got along well together.
Okay.
And most of my father's siblings ended up in Michigan, where my mother's family was from, and they ended up buying an old house and then a number of cottages on a small lake in southern Michigan, where
Right.
we spent summers for 4 or 5 years
Okay.
together.
Uh-huh. And what do you think about living in Japan for 50 years? Do you feel
It's home.
okay? Right. And did you have sort of ups and downs after you decided to move?
Well, when I first came to Japan, it was interesting because, as I said, I came by ship, but I had met many people through Kaji, all artists who had invited me to stay with them. So the first, I would say almost, year and a half I was in Japan, I knew no one who spoke English as a native language. All my friends were Japanese.
Oh. And you couldn't speak Japanese at that time, right? Or
Very little, but I love
little.
Japanese food, and I could, I taught myself hiragana before I came.
Was it difficult for you not being able to use your native language?
No, not really, because the people who I knew all could speak, some English, so that was fine.
Okay, so they're Japanese, but they could speak some English, right?
They could speak, yeah, and some spoke English, extremely well.
Okay. Right.
So, no, I didn't. My biggest culture shock, I think, number one, my biggest culture shock was, stepping out into the road looking the wrong way.
Okay. And by
Number
that,
two,
you mean,
number two is the toilet.
that's right. Stepping out into the world, looking onto the road. Onto
Yeah.
the road. Okay, because the
Yeah, you're
different-
looking at yeah, because the cars are, because they drive on the other side of the road.
Yeah, but how about Canada though? Which are they on the British system
No, they're on the same. They drive on the same side of the road as
as America?
Yeah.
I've never driven in Canada.
No,
Actually,
yeah,
but, so they drive on the right side of the road, right?
yeah.
And everybody else
Even though,
drives on the wrong side.
they've switched to kilometers and stuff,
Right,
And
right.
back when they were still on the foot mile, whatever, when I was in school, when I lived there, they hadn't changed to the metric system yet.
Okay. What is your present are you working now that
I still work a little bit. I have to. I don't have any retirement, unfortunately. So
you no retirement
I'm
needs?
retired. I'm retired from teaching as an English teacher in university, and I've taught at many universities. I've taught every kind of English class you can imagine. But right now I have 2 classes a week at after-school daycare first graders. I have 1 small private elementary school where I teach very tiny classes, very special school, a couple times a week, and 1 adult class.
Okay.
So I have a little bit every day, and enough to keep me alive.
So and were you connected with one particular, were you a full-time teacher at one particular?
I was full-time at Koge Joshitanki Daigakubu, which is, we lived at the bottom of the mountain where I live now. We moved there in 1989, and I had a full-time position there for 6 or 7 years.
So and so then you get I suppose you have a pension from, right?
No, I don't.
You don't have a pension. So
No, but
you have
back
to
when I
keep
first
working?
came to Japan, foreigners were not getting money from the pension system.
Really?
Yeah. How
Wow.
long have you been in Japan?
42 years.
Mhm. And when did you start full time? I imagine.
I've always been,
Okay. Okay, so
but
yeah,
I've always been in the pension system.
I wasn't. Yeah,
There are two
my
pension
first job I was
systems. The
not
two
full
pension
time.
systems, the national pension system, and then what the other one, I belong to 2 actually. The other was
Well,
the
I
private
belong to a
university.
private one, but I'm now, I aged out of it.
Right. Okay. Anyway, so then how do you the students that you taught when you first came here
Mhm.
and compared to the students who
I would say that when I first came here, the students that I taught were much more serious, much more
Now?
in-depth English. No,
No, then back then.
then
Oh, okay.
in the 70s,
The 70s.
for sure. Yeah.
Well, how would you account for those changes, for that decrease in interest or motivation or whatever it might be?
Well, I think, as I said, I was teaching at this private English school at first. And so we had a course for students that was, 6 hours a day for
Oh, an
6 months.
intensive course.
Yeah, intensive course.
Okay.
So, and all of those people were basically preparing to go abroad to study.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And most of them did. And that's how I met my second husband, because one of my students there went with my husband to a summer program before they went off to their various universities. So
Wow. So you did an intensive course here in Japan before the students left. Oh, that's because that's interesting, because I've suggested at my school intensive courses, quite a few times, but they never
Mhm. But
got.
this was, one of those independent language schools,
Oh, an independent. Okay, so
Yeah,
that's
okay, like Berlitz, but not Berlitz. So Linguaphone from England,
okay.
which, I think it no longer exists. I don't know. But they had home study courses, but they opened a school in Shinjuku.
Okay.
And they had, it was a very good, it was the elite of the elite that was coming to that school, I think.
If you had to classify or not classify, describe yourself as an artist, how would you would you use like I'm an expressionist
Yeah,
or something like that or what? But
I don't know. It's kind of difficult because I've done just about everything, oil painting, watercolor, everything. But I was very interested in the Japanese sumi painting.
sumie,
Sumie, yeah.
sumie. So
And
that would be just
I
a
have
minute.
my own style of sumie that I
We
do.
have to translate sumie for our non-Japanese.
Okay, so Japanese ink painting.
Japanese in paint. Okay, all right, thank you.
But what intrigued me most about haiku was that the haiku poets, especially the earlier haiku poets, also did art. And my favorite poet, who is Buson, was equally famous as a poet and an artist. But even Basho and
They
all
all,
the
yeah, that
poets,
was part of the whole thing. And
so
now
it's called haiga, and that was my really intense interest in also in coming to Japan.
right.
So it's something that I do. So I combine art and poetry a lot.
Yeah, I see. Can I show?
Mhm.
Something I guess you posted on Facebook or something that
And that was actually from the thing. 3 things I sent at the end were from Haiku North America.
oh, this is something.
Oh, this one. Oh, yeah, the apple pie, and yeah, this
Yeah,
is my
because
most recent one.
yeah, so I think, oh, we're going to the diner.
The diner, yes. So there's apple pie, and yeah. So
yeah.
right now I belong to a Zoom sketch group.
So what would you call this work if you had to describe it in English? What a
If I
watercolor?
had a poem with it, I'd call it haiga, but haiga can also be without poetry. So I
Right,
don't know.
well,
It's-
watercolor?
No, I wouldn't say it's just watercolor because it's sumi and watercolor. So the black is all done with the brush and ink
Okay.
first, and then I add watercolor to it. There's something called, what do they call it? Something. Oh gosh, I can't remember. Nenga, hagaki.
Something like a haiga.
It is basically kind of a haiga style, but about the same time that I started doing this kind of thing in Japan, a movement for painting postcards in a very free sumi style.
Like etegami. Yeah.
Etegami. I don't really
My
call
wife does that. Yeah.
I don't really call my stuff etegami, but it's very close to that style.
All right. And for our audience who aren't familiar with these things, what are these Chinese ideograms at the top right corner of that?
Okay, that's my Japanese signature, and my name in Japanese, which was given to me by my artist friend in Boston, was Kuriko.
Pretty cool.
Chestnut child. And our Renku teacher here in Japan said, well, ko can also be written as pronounced as su, so Kuri Su. So it's the romanization of my name.
Yeah. So
But
this
chestnut
character, the one on the top would be the one for chestnut.
Chestnut.
Pretty.
And the one below is child.
Right. Okay. And what is beyond that? The red.
On the side, that's my hanko, but I did it sideways, so I'm a little embarrassed.
And how would you describe a hanko in English? For our
hanko is a stamp that you use. There's artistic, and literary hanko, which is what these are.
Okay.
This one was actually made by one of my friends in my very first gallery that I showed at in Japan.
Okay.
So I'm very fond of this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The paper, is this what would be called washi paper?
It is washi paper, but this is Nepalese washi paper.
Nepalese washi. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's thicker, right? than the Japanese washi, right? It's a, this is
No,
what
it's
handmade
it's
paper.
pretty similar actually, but I have it in sketchbooks.
Okay.
So,
All right.
but I
Okay.
also
And
read,
do you do all
traditional.
your this these ink brush watercolor on Nepalese wash? Is that your
No, no, I do things on anything. I have so many different kinds of art supplies. So I
Have you
have
ever
traditional
done any
Japanese.
on cardboard boxes?
Yeah, I've done it on cardboard
Okay,
boxes too.
that's interesting.
I'll use gesso, which is a primer for acrylic or oil painting. I'll use that. Even back in my student days, I used to paint my father's shirt boards
Okay,
with gesso and then do oil painting on top of that, or watercolor.
all right. What would you say is the biggest difference in Japan? Now, we talked about the difference in students, but how about Japanese society as a whole? What do you think the biggest difference is from when you came here 50 years ago and now?
I was talking about this with a friend from Australia who, much younger. He's the same age as my son. But even since he first came, I think right now it seems like people are they're closing in.
Uh-huh.
Fewer students, when I was teaching, wanted to go abroad than when I first started teaching in university. People seem less adventuresome than they were. They were very adventuresome in the 60s and 70s and 80s, I think.
Yeah.
Extremely adventuresome. And even, into the 90s when, the bubble and everything, everybody wanted to go abroad. People were really interested in being international.
Right, yeah.
There's still, there's still a percentage of Japanese who are very much so. But I feel that the general tendency is less.
Yeah. And do you think that, I mean, I was just reading articles.
COVID hasn't helped.
Well, COVID, but before COVID, anything to do with internet devices, smartphones, video.
I think a lot of people are, they're more content with, making friends online than actually going places.
Okay.
But I noticed, I did notice just before I retired, which is about, they actually asked me to come back to school. So I was teaching at a school called Ferris, and I did know that there's always, I think in any school, there's students who just want to get by and graduate, and then there's ambitious students.
Okay.
But I did notice a tendency for a certain group of the students there to be much more serious about international things that were happening and things that were happening to the planet, and a desire to know more about things like that. So I don't think it goes away. I don't think there's ever, there's been a time when there was a larger percentage. And I was very lucky in the early days to teach, very passionate students.
Okay, good.
But I did notice that just before, that at that particular school I was teaching at, that there was a larger number of young women who were really very serious about what was going on in the world than had been in that particular school in my earlier years.
So I take it you enjoyed that experience with those particular students, the ones who were interested in.
Yeah. Well, I like teaching everybody. I'm not very good at languages, so I actually enjoy teaching students who don't like English.
Really? Well, we differ on that, but no, but well,
I like both, but I like to encourage.
It was a required course, so like people who wanted to get a teaching degree. Right?
I love teaching. I love teaching students
field,
who want to
right?
teach.
They had to take a required 1 year of English communication or something like that, and many of those students made it obvious, made it clear that they weren't interested at all, so there's not, it's, like trying to raise the dead or something like that, but then they started tracking, and dividing up students based on their English ability. So luckily, I got to teach them from about 20 years ago. I got teach the ones who were, in general, I guess they're more studious, right? And because they already had some, basic listening and speaking ability, right?
Yeah. There
So
are many different kinds of schools in Japan, and I've taught in many different schools. So I often liked teaching English to non-English majors because they didn't feel too shy in front of other people.
okay, yeah, yeah.
I taught at the Tokyo University of Agriculture, and I taught every level: junior, junior college, university, and graduate students.
Really? Okay.
And we had a lot of international students there. It was
Really?
interesting.
Ah, okay. Let me ask you about this.
That's the first painting I painted in Japan.
This is obviously Mount Fuji.
And it was from the very tiny window of the house of the people I was staying with in Numazu.
In where?
Numazu.
Numazu.
I
Okay.
stayed in Numazu for the first couple months.
Numazu is the name of a village or a town or what?
A city in the far corner of the, on the way to Shizuoka.
What prefecture? I mean, for our
Shizuoka
listeners
Prefecture.
who don't know this stuff.
Shizuoka Prefecture.
Shizuoka Prefecture. Okay.
So the Izu Peninsula.
Okay.
So on one side is Atami, on the other side, of the neck of the peninsula is Numazu.
Okay. And this at the bottom says Kris Young, 72, right? So at that time you weren't using your Chinese.
Not yet. I was using watercolor at the very beginning.
Okay.
But I got Sumi and the Sumi stone that year actually, and started sketching.
Is there anyone who in your, well, I guess we could, your branch or your field of artwork who you admired more than?
Well, as I said, one of the reasons, I really admired this person I was with in Boston before I came to Japan, Kaji Aso.
Okay.
So,
is he well known in Japan?
Yes.
Even now?
Even now, he passed away about 10 years ago, but he started his own school in Boston.
Okay.
And it's still going. Actually, he started it out of my apartment when I left from Japan. I decided to stay. Yeah. So he started giving his own private classes. We had talked about that, that in the art field that, traditionally, people would go to teachers who they admired to study. And if you think about the Impressionist movement, people would get together who had similar values, that kind of thing. Right. So we had talked about that a lot, in our early days together. And so when I decided to pack up and go to Japan for a year, Kaji used my apartment to teach his own classes, not just at the museum school. Okay. And out of that, when he left and for Japan in the summer, he expected to come back and nobody would be there. Well, more people were there. So he decided to start his own school, and he eventually bought a building in Japan, and it's very successful. Yeah.
Kris, we've got less than a minute left. Any parting words that you'd like to, that you leave our audience with?
Well, I think, as an artist and a poet, the most important things for me are I do them because I can't not do them, and they give me energy and hope.
Okay, well, that's very good. So, Kris Kondo, thank you very much for being with us today.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, and I'll contact you later. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.